The scream echoed down the dusty main street of Mineral Park, Arizona, cutting through the evening hush like a knife. Olivia James froze mid-step, her hand clutching the worn leather satchel containing the day's earnings from the millinery shop where she worked. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she peered through the gathering twilight toward the sound. The year was 1883, and Mineral Park had grown from a small mining settlement to a proper town with storefronts, saloons, and even a small hotel. Despite its growth, danger still lurked in the shadows, especially for a woman alone after sunset. Olivia had stayed late at the shop, finishing a custom hat for the banker's wife. At 22, she had been working for Mrs. Hollister at the millinery for almost 4 years, having arrived in Mineral Park as an orphan with little more than determination and skilled hands. Tonight, her dedication to her craft might have been a grave mistake. As she hurried along the boardwalk, the hairs on her neck prickled. 3 men emerged from the alleyway beside the saloon, their eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. Olivia quickened her pace, but they moved faster, cutting across her path. "Well, looky what we have here," drawled the tallest one, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Olivia clutched her satchel tighter. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I need to get home." The second man, wearing a filthy red bandana around his neck, stepped closer. "No need to rush, miss. Night's just getting started." "Please let me pass," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The third man, shorter but broader than the others, grabbed her arm. "We just want to show you a good time." "Let go of me." Olivia pulled away, but his grip tightened painfully. "Come on now, don't be difficult," the tall one growled, reaching for her other arm. They began dragging her toward the dark alley, Olivia struggling against their grip. Her boots scraped against the dirt as she fought, her satchel falling to the ground. "Help!" she cried out, her voice echoing between the buildings. The sound of spurs jingling made the men pause. A shadow fell across the street as a tall figure appeared, silhouetted against the golden light spilling from the saloon. "I believe the lady asked you to let her go." The voice was low, measured, but carried an undercurrent of steel that made the men freeze. The stranger stepped forward, and Olivia caught her first glimpse of him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a long duster coat over trail-worn clothes. His dark hat was pulled low, but she could see the glint of his eyes as they fixed on her assailants. The tallest attacker found his voice first. "Mind your own business, cowboy. This ain't your concern." The cowboy didn't move, but somehow seemed to grow larger in the fading light. His gaze never wavered, and there was something in that look that made the men shift uncomfortably. "I'm making it my concern," he replied, his hand resting casually near the holstered revolver at his hip. The man in the red bandana glanced nervously at his companions. "Come on, there's 3 of us and 1 of him." The cowboy's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "That's poor odds," he paused. "For you." Something in his steady gaze, the absolute certainty in his posture, made the 3 men hesitate. The one holding Olivia's arm loosened his grip. "She ain't worth the trouble," muttered the tall one, backing away. "Agreed," said the cowboy, his voice deceptively soft. "So walk away while you still can." The shortest man released Olivia's arm and stepped back. All 3 began retreating, glaring hatefully at the cowboy but clearly unwilling to test his resolve. "This ain't over," the tall one spat, but his companions were already pulling him away. "It is for tonight," the cowboy replied, watching until they disappeared around the corner. Only when they were gone did he turn his attention to Olivia. The intensity in his eyes softened as he bent to retrieve her fallen satchel. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, handing it to her. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No, thanks to you." She accepted the satchel with trembling hands. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "Preston Ryder," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "May I escort you home, miss?" "James. Olivia James," she replied, feeling oddly calm in his presence despite the ordeal. "And yes, I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Ryder." "Just Preston, please," he said, offering his arm. As they walked through the darkening streets of Mineral Park, Olivia found herself studying her rescuer from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to action, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You're new to town," she observed. It wasn't a question. Preston nodded. "Arrived this afternoon. Looking for work." "What kind of work?" "Whatever pays honest money," he replied. "I've worked cattle most of my life, but I can turn my hand to just about anything." Olivia led him down a side street to a modest boarding house. "This is where I stay," she said, stopping at the gate. "Mrs. Finch runs a respectable place for working women." Preston looked up at the building, noting the clean curtains in the windows and the well-kept garden. "Seems nice." "It is." Olivia hesitated, then asked, "Where are you staying?" "Haven't found a place yet. Thought I'd ask around tomorrow after I look for work." Olivia made a quick decision. "Mrs. Finch's husband runs a livery stable. They sometimes rent out a room above it to men passing through. It's not fancy, but it's clean and affordable." Preston smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face. "I'd be obliged for the recommendation." "It's the least I can do," Olivia replied, suddenly aware of how closely they were standing. She took a step back, feeling warmth rise to her cheeks. "Thank you again, Mr. Ryder Preston. I wish you luck finding work." "And I'm glad you're safe, Miss James," he said, replacing his hat. "Good night." "Good night," she echoed, watching as he waited for her to enter the boarding house before turning away. Olivia closed the door behind her, her heart still racing, though whether from the attack or the encounter that followed, she couldn't quite say. Morning brought the dusty golden light that was characteristic of Arizona territories in late summer. Olivia dressed carefully in a simple blue calico dress, pinning her chestnut hair into a neat bun. As she prepared for the day, her thoughts kept returning to the events of the previous evening and to Preston Ryder. There had been something in his eyes, a mixture of strength and sadness that had caught her attention, even in the midst of danger. She chided herself for such fanciful thoughts about a man she barely knew, a drifter who would likely move on as suddenly as he had appeared. At breakfast in the boarding house dining room, Mrs. Finch was eager to hear about the new arrival in town. "A cowboy, you say?" the older woman asked, pouring coffee. "Handsome." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "I hardly noticed, Mrs. Finch. I was rather preoccupied with not being dragged into an alley." Mrs. Finch clucked sympathetically. "Those men should be run out of town. Sheriff Baldwin is too busy cozying up to the mine owners to keep decent folk safe." She set down the coffee pot. "But you say this cowboy stood up to all three." "He did. And I mentioned your husband's room above the livery." Mrs. Finch smiled knowingly. "Did you now?" "Well, I'll tell Thomas to expect him." Olivia hurried to change the subject, discussing plans for the day's work at the millinery instead. After breakfast, she set out for the shop, taking care to walk on the busier side of the street despite the early hour. The millinery shop occupied a prime spot on Main Street, its window displaying Mrs. Hollister's finest creations. Olivia had learned the trade quickly, her natural talent for design and detail making her invaluable to the older woman. As she approached, she was surprised to see Mrs. Hollister in conversation with a familiar tall figure. Preston Ryder stood outside the shop, hat in hand, listening intently to something the proprietress was saying. Mrs. Hollister caught sight of Olivia and waved her over. "Olivia, this gentleman was just asking about you." Preston turned, and Olivia felt a flutter in her chest at the way his eyes lit up upon seeing her. "Good morning, Miss James," he greeted her, his deep voice carrying in the morning air. "Mr. Ryder," she replied, nodding politely. "I hope you found accommodations last night." "I did, thanks to your recommendation. Mr. Finch was kind enough to rent me the room above the stable." He shifted his weight, seeming almost uncomfortable. "I wanted to make sure you were well this morning after what happened." Before Olivia could respond, Mrs. Hollister interjected. "He told me about those ruffians, Olivia. You should have said something." "I didn't want to worry you," Olivia explained. "And Mr. Ryder handled the situation admirably." Mrs. Hollister studied Preston with new appreciation. "Well, young man, it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude. Olivia is my right hand in this shop." Preston shook his head. "No debt, madam. Any decent man would have done the same." "Perhaps, but not all men do," Mrs. Hollister replied pointedly. She glanced between them, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Now, Mr. Ryder tells me he's looking for work. You mentioned yesterday that the delivery shelves in the back room need repairing, didn't you, Olivia?" Olivia blinked in surprise. "Yes, but excellent," Mrs. Hollister declared. "Mr. Ryder, if you're handy with tools, I'd be willing to pay you fair wages for the repair." Preston's gaze moved from Mrs. Hollister to Olivia. "If Miss James has no objection to my presence, I'd be happy to help." Olivia found herself nodding. "No objection at all." "Wonderful," Mrs. Hollister said, unlocking the shop door. "Come in, both of you. I'll show you what needs to be done." The morning passed in a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Preston set to work in the back room, the sound of his hammering a steady backdrop as Olivia and Mrs. Hollister attended to customers. Occasionally, Olivia would bring him water or check on his progress, each brief interaction revealing a little more about the quiet cowboy. By mid-afternoon, the shelves were not only repaired but reinforced and improved. Mrs. Hollister inspected his work with growing approval. "You have skilled hands, Mr. Ryder," she declared. "The shelves are sturdier than when they were new." Preston accepted the compliment with a modest nod. "My father was a carpenter before he turned to ranching. He taught me to respect good craftsmanship." Mrs. Hollister glanced at Olivia, then back at Preston. "Well, since you've done such fine work here, I wonder if you might consider another task. The delivery wagon needs attention. The wheel is wobbling something terrible. My regular man is laid up with a broken leg, and I need someone reliable to make deliveries to the outlying homesteads." Olivia looked at her employer in surprise. Mrs. Hollister was notoriously particular about who she hired, yet here she was offering a position to a man she'd just met. Preston seemed equally taken aback. "That's generous, madam, but I don't want charity." "Charity?" Mrs. Hollister scoffed. "Young man, I don't run a charitable establishment. I need someone who can handle a wagon and who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right. You've demonstrated both qualities." She named a fair weekly wage, plus room and board at the livery if that suits you. Preston considered the offer, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I had planned to move on once I'd earned enough for supplies." "Plans change," Mrs. Hollister said simply. "At least think about it. The position is yours if you want it." After she walked away to help a customer, Preston turned to Olivia. "Your employer is quite decisive." Olivia laughed softly. "Mrs. Hollister knows what she wants. She built this business from nothing after her husband died in the first silver rush. She's a good judge of character." Preston leaned against the newly repaired shelves, studying Olivia with quiet intensity. "And what about you, Miss James? Are you a good judge of character?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I like to think so," she replied. "Though sometimes people surprise you. Is that good or bad?" "Depends on the surprise," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hollister calling Olivia to assist with a customer. As she moved away, Olivia felt Preston's eyes following her, and something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling both unfamiliar and somehow right. By the time the shop closed that evening, Preston had agreed to stay on, at least temporarily, as Mrs. Hollister's delivery man and general handyman. He walked Olivia back to the boarding house again, their conversation flowing more easily than the night before. "How did you come to Mineral Park?" he asked as they strolled through the fading light. Olivia's expression grew distant. "I was 16 when my parents died of fever back east. My father's cousin lived here, working at the mine. He sent for me, but by the time I arrived, there had been a cave-in." She paused. "I found myself alone in a strange town with barely enough money for a week's lodging." Preston's face softened with understanding. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," she admitted. "But Mrs. Finch took me in and Mrs. Hollister gave me a chance at the shop when she saw I could sew." She glanced up at him. "What about you? What brings you to Arizona territory?" A shadow crossed his face. "I've been drifting for a while. Used to work a cattle ranch up in Colorado, but circumstances changed." Olivia sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Everyone in the West had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. "Well, I'm glad those circumstances brought you to Mineral Park," she said softly as they reached the boarding house gate. Preston's expression lightened. "As am I, Miss James." "Olivia," she corrected him. "If we're to be working together, you might as well use my given name." "Olivia," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Good night, then." "Good night, Preston," she replied, watching him tip his hat before turning away. As she prepared for bed that night, Olivia found herself wondering about the mysteries that seemed to shadow Preston Ryder. There was a wariness about him, a guardedness that spoke of past hurts. Yet beneath that reserve, she sensed a fundamental decency that had drawn her to him from their first encounter. She fell asleep thinking of storm-gray eyes and the way they softened when they looked at her. The next few weeks established a new pattern in Olivia's life. Preston became a regular presence at the millinery, repairing the wagon and making deliveries 3 times a week to homesteads and ranches outside town. On delivery days, he would leave early and return late, often covered in dust from the trail, but always taking time to check in at the shop before retiring to his room above the livery. On days he wasn't delivering, he helped with various repairs around the shop or assisted the blacksmith, who had quickly recognized his value as an extra pair of strong hands. Word of his skills spread through town, and soon other merchants were offering him odd jobs. Olivia watched his integration into the community with quiet satisfaction. Though Preston remained somewhat reserved, the townspeople were gradually accepting him, particularly after he helped organize a bucket brigade when a fire broke out at the feed store. One evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, Olivia was closing the shop alone. Mrs. Hollister had left early with a headache, entrusting her assistant with the day's receipts. Preston was due back from a delivery run to the Jackson Ranch, some 20 miles outside town. As Olivia counted the money and recorded the day's sales in the ledger, the shop door opened, the bell jingling cheerfully. She looked up with a smile, expecting to see Preston, but her smile froze as 3 familiar figures stepped inside. "We're closed," she said firmly, trying to hide her fear as she recognized the men who had attempted to drag her into the alley. The tall one, clearly the leader, grinned unpleasantly. Now, that ain't no way to greet paying customers." "The shop is closed," Olivia repeated, her hand moving beneath the counter to where Mrs. Hollister kept a small derringer. "Please leave." The man with the red bandana sauntered forward, examining a display of ribbons. "Fancy place you got here. Bet there's good money in ladies' hats." Olivia's fingers closed around the derringer. "Sheriff Baldwin's office is just down the street." The third man laughed. "Sheriff's out at the mine dealing with some trouble. Won't be back till morning." He moved toward the counter. "No cowboy to save you this time, neither." Olivia pulled out the derringer and aimed it steadily. "I don't need saving. Now get out." The men hesitated, eyeing the small gun. The tall one's face darkened. "You think you can handle that little pop gun, girl?" "I think you don't want to find out," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. The bell jingled again, and all four turned to see Preston standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the last rays of sunlight. His eyes took in the scene in an instant, narrowing dangerously as he recognized the men. "I thought I made myself clear last time," he said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The leader sneered. "Your luck won't hold forever, cowboy. There's 3 of us." "Still poor odds," Preston replied, echoing his words from their first encounter. He hadn't drawn his gun, but his hand rested near it. "You boys clearly aren't fast learners. So let me explain it one more time. You're going to leave this shop, leave this lady alone, and if I ever see you threatening anyone in this town again, you'll regret it." "Big talk," said the man in the bandana, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Not talk," Preston corrected him. "Promise." Something in his tone must have convinced them, because the 3 men began backing toward the door. The leader paused before exiting. "This ain't over," he growled. Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping so only the man could hear. "Yes, it is. Because if anything happens to Miss James or this shop, I will hold you personally responsible, and I will find you." He opened the door. "Now go." The men slunk out, casting venomous glances over their shoulders. Only when they had disappeared down the street did Preston turn to Olivia, concern replacing the cold anger in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to the counter where she still stood holding the derringer. Olivia nodded, lowering the gun with trembling hands. "Yes." They didn't have time to do anything. She took a deep breath. "Thank you, again." Preston gently took the derringer from her hands and placed it on the counter. "You were handling yourself well. I'm impressed." Despite the residual fear, Olivia felt a flush of pride at his words. "Mrs. Hollister insisted I learn to use it after I started closing up alone." "Smart woman," Preston commented. He hesitated, then asked, "Those men, they're the same ones from before. Did they say anything about why they're targeting you?" Olivia shook her head. "No, but they mentioned money. I think they just saw the shop and thought it would be an easy target with Mrs. Hollister gone." Preston frowned. "Maybe, but I don't like the coincidence." He glanced around. "Are you finished here? I'd like to see you safely home." "Just let me lock up the money," Olivia replied, securing the cash box in the safe hidden beneath the floorboards behind the counter. As they walked to the boarding house, Preston remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the darkening streets. There was a new tension in his shoulders that Olivia hadn't noticed before. "You're worried they'll come back," she observed as they reached Mrs. Finch's gate. Preston nodded. "Men like that don't like being shown up, especially twice, and they clearly have no respect for the law." "What should we do?" He considered her question carefully. "For now, make sure you're not alone at the shop. I'll speak with Sheriff Baldwin when he returns, but—" He hesitated. "But you don't think he'll do much," Olivia finished for him. It wasn't a question. "From what I've seen and heard, he's more concerned with keeping the mine owners happy than policing the town." Preston confirmed. "Still, it's worth reporting." Olivia studied his face in the gathering darkness. "You've dealt with men like this before, haven't you?" Something flashed in Preston's eyes, an old pain quickly masked. "Yes," he said simply, offering no elaboration. They stood in silence for a moment, the evening air cool against their skin. Finally, Preston spoke again. "Would you allow me to escort you to church on Sunday?" he asked, the question coming so unexpectedly that Olivia blinked in surprise. "Church," she repeated. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yes, church. I hear it's what respectable folk do on Sundays." Olivia returned his smile. "Yes, they do, and yes, I would like that very much." "Good," he said, his expression warming. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Preston." As she watched him walk away, Olivia realized that, beneath her lingering fear from the encounter at the shop, another emotion had taken root, a growing affection for the quiet, steadfast cowboy who had twice come to her aid. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of approaching autumn. Olivia dressed with particular care, choosing a pale green dress that Mrs. Hollister had helped her make from fabric left over from a special order. She pinned her hair up, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face, and topped it with a small hat of her own design. Mrs. Finch noticed her extra attention to appearance and smiled knowingly as Olivia descended the stairs. "That cowboy of yours is waiting on the porch," she informed Olivia. "Been there 10 minutes already, looking nervous as a cat in a rocking chair factory." "He's not my cowboy, Mrs. Finch," Olivia protested, though the words sent a pleasant flutter through her stomach. "Not yet, perhaps," the older woman replied with a wink. "But I wasn't born yesterday, child. Now go on before the poor man wears a hole in my porch with his pacing." Olivia found Preston waiting as promised, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a new-looking vest. His usually unruly dark hair was neatly combed and he'd shaved carefully. He turned as the door opened, and the look that crossed his face when he saw her made Olivia's heart skip a beat. "Good morning," she greeted him. Suddenly feeling shy, Preston cleared his throat. "Good morning. You look beautiful." The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, aware of the curious glances from passers-by as they walked toward the small white church at the end of Main Street. It was the first time they had been seen together in public on what could be construed as a social occasion rather than a working relationship. The church was already filling with townspeople when they arrived. Mrs. Hollister waved them over to her pew, her expression delighted at seeing them together. As the service began, Olivia was acutely conscious of Preston beside her, the solid warmth of his presence, the deep resonance of his voice during the hymns. After church, many of the congregation gathered outside to socialize. Preston remained at Olivia's side as several people approached to introduce themselves. "Mr. Ryder," called a distinguished-looking older man. "I've heard good things about your work." Preston nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." "Elias Peterson," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "I own the general store. My wife tells me Mrs. Hollister speaks highly of you." "Mrs. Hollister has been very kind," Preston replied, shaking the offered hand. "Not kind practical," Mrs. Peterson interjected, a plump, cheerful woman at her husband's side. "She says you're the most reliable delivery man she's had in years." She beamed at Olivia. "And what a lovely couple you make." Olivia felt herself blush. "Oh, we've only just begun courting, madam," Preston interrupted smoothly, surprising Olivia. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "If Miss James permits me to call it that. For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak, caught off guard by his declaration. Then she found her voice. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe that would be accurate." Preston's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. The Petersons moved on to greet other parishioners, and Preston leaned closer to Olivia. "I hope I wasn't presumptuous," he said quietly, but it seemed simpler than explaining. "It was," she agreed, then added with a touch of mischief, "and not entirely inaccurate, I think, unless church attendance is as far as you intended this to go." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Not by a long shot, Olivia James." The morning passed pleasantly as they mingled with the townspeople. Preston was introduced to various merchants and citizens, while Olivia observed with satisfaction how easily he interacted with them. He was reserved but courteous, listening more than he spoke but showing genuine interest when he did converse. After the socializing wound down, Preston suggested they take a walk before he escorted her home for Sunday dinner. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, leading her toward the outskirts of town. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the livery stable where Preston had his room. Instead of going inside, he led her around to a small corral at the back. "Mr. Finch let me use this space," Preston explained, gesturing to where a beautiful chestnut mare grazed peacefully. "I bought her yesterday." Olivia approached the fence, admiring the horse. "She's lovely. Does she have a name?" "Penny," Preston said, joining her at the fence. "I've been saving from the delivery work and the odd jobs. Figured it was time to have my own mount again, instead of borrowing Mr. Finch's horses." Olivia sensed there was more significance to this purchase than Preston was saying. "She means you're staying," she observed quietly. He nodded, turning to face her. "I came to Mineral Park with no intention of putting down roots. I've been moving from place to place for 2 years, never staying anywhere long enough to—" He paused, "to care." "What changed?" Olivia asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Preston's gray eyes held hers. "I think you know." Her heart beat faster at the simple statement and all it implied. "I'm glad," she said softly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "So am I." The touch of his fingers against her cheek sent a warm shiver through her. For a moment, Olivia thought he might kiss her, but instead, Preston stepped back respectfully. "I should get you back to Mrs. Finch's," he said. "She invited me to Sunday dinner, and I wouldn't want to make a poor impression by being late." Olivia smiled, both disappointed and touched by his restraint. "No, we wouldn't want that. She's been cooking since dawn." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Preston's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they had been meant to walk this way all along. Autumn progressed, bringing cooler days and the gradual transformation of the landscape around Mineral Park. Preston's position as Mrs. Hollister's delivery man became permanent, and his reputation as a reliable worker spread throughout the town. He was often sought out for jobs requiring strength or skill with tools, and he never turned down honest work. His courtship of Olivia continued at a measured pace. They attended church together every Sunday, followed by dinner either at Mrs. Finch's boarding house or occasionally at Mrs. Hollister's home. On pleasant evenings, they would take walks around town, sometimes stopping to sit on a bench near the small town square. It was during one such evening walk, nearly 2 months after Preston's arrival in Mineral Park, that they encountered trouble again. They had ventured a bit farther than usual, toward the edge of town where new construction was expanding the settlement. The area was mostly deserted at that hour, the workers having returned home for the evening. Mrs. Hollister mentioned expanding the shop, Olivia said as they passed a half-built storefront. She thinks Mineral Park is going to grow significantly now that the new silver vein has been found. Preston nodded thoughtfully. The mine owner was in the saloon last night, talking about bringing in more workers. Said he's ordered new equipment from back east. That would mean more families, more women needing hats, Olivia mused. It could be good for business. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Preston tensed beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "What is it?" Olivia asked, sensing his sudden alertness. "Not sure," he replied quietly, "but let's head back toward the center of town." They had turned to retrace their steps when 3 riders appeared around the corner of an unfinished building. Even in the fading light, Olivia recognized them immediately, the same 3 men who had twice threatened her. "Well, look who it is," called the tall one, dismounting from his horse. "Been waiting for a chance to catch you two alone." Preston positioned himself slightly in front of Olivia. "You boys don't learn, do you?" The man in the red bandana spat on the ground. "We learn just fine. Learn to bide our time for one thing." He and the 3rd man also dismounted, spreading out to flank them. "What do you want?" Preston asked, his voice deadly calm. "Started with wanting the girl," replied the leader with a nasty grin. "Now we want payback for you making us look bad." He drew a knife from his belt. "Figured we'd cut you up a bit, show the lady what a real man looks like when he's bleeding." Olivia's heart pounded with fear, but she kept her voice steady. "Sheriff Baldwin will hang you if you harm either of us." The 3rd man laughed. "Sheriff's got no love for outsiders." "And accidents happen all the time in frontier towns." Preston's hand moved to his gun. "Olivia, when I tell you, I want you to run back toward town as fast as you can." "I'm not leaving you," she protested in a whisper. "Please," he said, his eyes never leaving the 3 men. "I need to know you're safe." Before she could argue further, the leader lunged forward with his knife. Preston drew his revolver in one fluid motion, firing a warning shot into the ground at the man's feet. "Next one won't miss," he warned as the man froze. "Now back off and ride out of town, or I'll give you something to remember me by." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the man with the bandana made a sudden move toward his own gun. Preston's second shot knocked the weapon from his hand, making him howl in pain. "Run, Olivia!" Preston shouted, and this time she obeyed, gathering her skirts and sprinting toward the more populated part of town. Behind her, she heard shouts and another gunshot. Fear for Preston gave her speed she didn't know she possessed. She ran until she reached the saloon, bursting through the doors. "Help!" she cried to the startled patrons. 3 men are attacking Mr. Ryder at the new construction site." Several men leaped to their feet, including Thomas Finch and the blacksmith. They grabbed their guns and rushed out, Olivia following close behind despite their protests. By the time they reached the construction area, they found Preston standing over one of the attackers, who lay groaning on the ground with a bullet wound in his leg. The other 2 had apparently fled on horseback, leaving their injured companion behind. "Preston!" Olivia called out, relieved to see him on his feet. He turned at the sound of her voice, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "You're all right." "Me? I wasn't the one facing 3 armed men," she replied, hurrying to his side. Thomas Finch and the blacksmith took charge of the wounded attacker, hauling him to his feet. "We'll take this scum to the sheriff," Finch declared. "He can't ignore a shooting in town, even if he wants to." Preston nodded his thanks. The other 2 rode south. Tall one took a bullet in the arm, but he'll live. The men organized a small posse to pursue the fleeing attackers, while Finch and the blacksmith dragged their captive toward the sheriff's office. Left alone with Olivia, Preston finally allowed his composure to slip. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I was afraid they might have had a fourth man waiting to catch you, he murmured against her hair. Olivia clung to him, the reality of what had just happened washing over her. I was terrified they would kill you. Preston drew back slightly to look at her face, his expression intensely serious. Olivia, there's something I need to tell you, something about my past. She placed her hand against his cheek. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It might, he insisted. Those men, the way they came after us. It reminded me of why I've been drifting for so long. Olivia nodded slowly. Let's go somewhere we can talk. They walked to the small town square, now deserted as evening had fully settled in. Sitting on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, Preston took a deep breath and began his story. 2 years ago, I was foreman at a cattle ranch in Colorado. The owner, Henry Blackwell, was a good man who treated his workers fairly. His daughter, Sarah, and I became close. Preston's eyes grew distant with memory. There was a rival rancher, Marcus Thorpe, who wanted Blackwell's water rights. When Blackwell refused to sell, Thorpe hired gunmen to intimidate him. Preston's jaw tightened. One night they attacked the ranch. I fought them off, but in the gunfight, Sarah was killed by a stray bullet. Olivia gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Blackwell was devastated. He didn't blame me, but I blamed myself. I should have been more careful, should have kept her safe. Preston's voice was rough with old grief. After the funeral, I tracked down 2 of Thorpe's men and turned them over to the sheriff. But Thorpe himself had powerful friends. He went free. That's terrible, Olivia said softly. Preston nodded. I couldn't stay there, seeing her grave, seeing her father's grief. So I left, drifted from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. He looked at her intently. Until I met you. Olivia reached for his hand, holding it tightly. Thank you for telling me. There's more, Preston continued. The reason those men worry me is that they remind me of Thorpe's hired guns men who enjoy causing pain, who hold grudges. I don't think they're connected to my past, but their type is familiar, and I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Nothing's going to happen to me, Olivia assured him. And what happened to Sarah wasn't your fault. You were protecting her family just as you protected me tonight. Preston shook his head. You don't understand. I've been afraid to care about anyone since Sarah died. Afraid that caring means eventually losing, and I couldn't face that again. His gray eyes held hers. But from the moment I saw you being dragged toward that alley, I knew it was already too late. I already cared what happened to you. Olivia's heart swelled at his words. I'm not afraid to care, Preston. I'm only afraid of not taking the chance when it's offered. In the silver moonlight filtering through the cottonwood branches, Preston finally did what he had restrained himself from doing for months. He leaned forward and kissed her, his lips gentle against hers. Olivia responded, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened, speaking of longing and promise and possibility. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Olivia James. I think I have since that first night. And I love you, Preston Ryder, she replied, the words feeling right and true. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps. They looked up to see Sheriff Baldwin, a heavy-set man with a perpetually disgruntled expression. Miss James, Mr. Ryder, he greeted them gruffly. I need statements from both of you about tonight's incident. They followed the sheriff to his office, where they found the wounded attacker handcuffed to a chair, his leg bandaged. He glared at them with undisguised hatred. This one says his name is Mike Dalan, Baldwin informed them. Claims you shot him without provocation, Ryder. Preston's expression hardened. That's a lie. He and his friends threatened Miss James and me with a knife, then drew on me when I fired a warning shot. The sheriff looked dubious. 3 against 1, and you got away with barely a scratch. Convenient story. It's the truth, Olivia insisted. These are the same men who tried to drag me into an alley 2 months ago and who threatened me at Mrs. Hollister's shop. Baldwin frowned. Why wasn't I informed of these previous incidents? You were at the mine during the second one, Preston reminded him. And after the first, Miss James didn't file a formal complaint. The sheriff harumphed, clearly displeased at having his negligence pointed out. Well, I'll need to speak to witnesses who saw tonight's confrontation. There weren't any, Preston said. That's why they chose that location. It was deserted. Baldwin looked between them suspiciously. Convenient again. Sheriff, Olivia said firmly. Half the saloon saw me run in for help, and several respectable citizens responded. They can attest to finding Mr. Ryder defending himself against these attackers. The sheriff seemed about to argue further when the door opened, and Elias Peterson strode in, his normally genial expression replaced by stern authority. Baldwin, he said sharply, I've just heard about the attack on Miss James and Mr. Ryder. As head of the town council, I expect a full investigation and proper charges filed. Baldwin's demeanor changed instantly. Of course, Mr. Peterson. I was just taking their statements. Good, Peterson said, and I trust you'll be organizing a search for the other 2 assailants. Already have men looking, Baldwin assured him, though Olivia suspected this wasn't entirely true. Peterson turned to Preston and Olivia. Are you both all right? No injuries. We're fine, thanks to Mr. Ryder's quick action, Olivia replied. And to Miss James's courage in getting help, Preston added. Peterson nodded approvingly. The town council will want to recognize your handling of this situation, Mr. Ryder. We value citizens who stand up against lawlessness. He gave Baldwin a pointed look. All our citizens should feel safe in Mineral Park. After giving their statements and answering Baldwin's grudging questions, Preston and Olivia were finally free to leave. Peterson accompanied them outside. Thank you for intervening, Mr. Peterson, Preston said as they stood in the street. The older man waved away his thanks. This town has come too far to let ruffians threaten decent folk. Besides, he added with a small smile, my wife would never forgive me if I didn't look out for her favorite young couple. Olivia blushed at the designation, but neither she nor Preston corrected him. Peterson bid them good night, and Preston escorted Olivia back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Finch was anxiously waiting on the porch. Thank the Lord you're both safe, she exclaimed, embracing Olivia. Thomas told me what happened. Those men should be run out of the territory. One of them won't be running anywhere for a while, Preston said grimly, and with luck, the sheriff will catch the other 2. Mrs. Finch ushered them inside, insisting on serving them tea despite the late hour. As they sat in her cozy parlor, Olivia noticed Preston watching her with a tender expression that made her heart skip. When he finally rose to leave, Preston took both of Olivia's hands in his. After what happened tonight, I don't want to waste any more time, he said quietly. Olivia James, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The proposal was sudden yet not unexpected. In the aftermath of danger, with emotions running high and truths revealed, it seemed the natural culmination of their growing feelings. Yes, Olivia answered without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Preston Ryder. Mrs. Finch, who had discreetly retreated to the kitchen but was clearly eavesdropping, let out a delighted squeal. Preston grinned at the sound, then leaned forward to kiss Olivia briefly but sweetly. I'll speak to Reverend Collins tomorrow, he promised. As he left, Olivia felt a sense of certainty settle over her. Despite the danger they had faced, or perhaps because of it, she knew with absolute clarity that her future belonged with Preston. News of their engagement spread quickly through Mineral Park. Mrs. Hollister was among the first to congratulate them, offering to close the shop for their wedding day and insisting on making Olivia's wedding dress as a gift. "It's about time something good happened in this town," she declared, her usual brisk manner softened by genuine affection. "And I couldn't have chosen better for you myself, Olivia." The following weeks were busy with preparations. Preston continued his delivery work while also beginning construction on a small house at the edge of town, on a plot of land he purchased with his savings. Several men from the church volunteered to help with the building, turning it into a community project. Olivia, meanwhile, split her time between the millinery shop and preparing for her new role as a wife. Mrs. Finch and several other women from town provided advice and gifts for her hope chest. The wounded attacker, Mike Dolan, was tried and sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison for assault. Of his companions, only one was caught, the man in the red bandana, who was found in a saloon 2 towns over and brought back to face justice. The leader remained at large, a fact that concerned Preston deeply. "He's the most dangerous of the 3, he told Olivia one evening as they sat on the porch of her boarding house. "The kind who doesn't forget a grudge." Olivia squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We can't let fear of what might happen stop us from living our lives, Preston." He smiled ruefully. "When did you get to be so wise?" "I learned it from a certain cowboy," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "One who taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right despite the fear." Preston kissed the top of her head. 2 more weeks until the wedding. The house should be finished just in time. Mrs. Hollister says my dress will be ready for a final fitting tomorrow, Olivia told him. "She's been working on it every evening." "I can't wait to see you in it," Preston said, his voice warm with anticipation. The night before their wedding arrived crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the October sky like diamonds on black velvet. Following tradition, Olivia stayed at the boarding house while Preston spent his last night as a bachelor in his room above the livery. Mrs. Hollister had delivered the completed wedding dress that afternoon, a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace overlay that made Olivia gasp when she saw it. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she had exclaimed, tears springing to her eyes. Mrs. Hollister had patted her hand affectionately. "Only the best for my girl. You deserve every happiness, Olivia." Now, as Olivia prepared for bed, a knock at her door revealed Mrs. Finch carrying a steaming cup of herbal tea. "To help you sleep," the older woman explained, setting it on the bedside table. "Every bride needs her rest before the big day." Olivia smiled gratefully. "I don't know if I can sleep. I'm too excited." Mrs. Finch sat on the edge of the bed. "I felt the same way the night before I married Thomas, and that was 32 years ago." Her eyes grew misty with memory. "Best decision I ever made." "Were you afraid?" Olivia asked. "Not of marrying, but of the unknown, of course," Mrs. Finch replied. "Marriage is a leap of faith. But when it's the right person." She patted Olivia's hand. "You've chosen well, child. That young man adores you, and he's proven his character more than once." After Mrs. Finch left, Olivia sipped her tea and gazed out the window at the starlit sky. Tomorrow she would no longer be Olivia James, but Olivia Ryder, a new name, a new life, a new beginning. The thought filled her with joy and anticipation. She was just drifting off to sleep when a noise at her window startled her fully awake. Sitting up, she saw the window slide open and a dark figure climbed through. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. "Make a sound and I'll cut your throat," growled a familiar voice, the leader of the 3 attackers. Terror froze Olivia as the man pressed a knife against her neck. "Your cowboy boyfriend put a bullet in my arm and got my friends locked up," he hissed. Now I'm going to take something he values, call it an eye for an eye. He began dragging her toward the window. Olivia fought against his grip, her mind racing. If he got her out of the boarding house, no one would hear her cries for help. Remembering what Preston had taught her about self-defense, she suddenly went limp, causing her attacker to adjust his grip. In that moment, she drove her elbow hard into his stomach, then stomped on his instep with all her strength. The man cursed, loosening his hold enough for Olivia to break free. She lunged for the door, screaming as loudly as she could. "Help, Mrs. Finch, help!" Her attacker grabbed her arm, yanking her back. "You'll pay for that," he snarled, raising his knife. The bedroom door burst open, revealing Thomas Finch with a shotgun. "Let her go," he roared. The intruder hesitated only a second before shoving Olivia aside and diving through the open window. A moment later, they heard the sound of running footsteps fading into the night. Mrs. Finch appeared behind her husband, her face pale with fear. "Olivia, are you hurt?" Olivia shook her head, though her whole body was trembling. "He tried to abduct me, revenge against Preston." Thomas Finch rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. "He's gone. I'll get the sheriff." He turned to his wife. "Don't let Olivia out of your sight." As Mr. Finch hurried away, Mrs. Finch wrapped a blanket around Olivia's shoulders and led her downstairs to the parlor. "We'll wait here where it's safer," she said, stoking the fire to drive away the chill. Other boarders, awakened by the commotion, gathered in the parlor, murmuring in concern. Mrs. Finch prepared tea for everyone, keeping a protective eye on Olivia. Less than 20 minutes later, the front door burst open and Preston rushed in, his face white with fear. He had obviously dressed hastily, his shirt untucked and his hair disheveled. "Olivia," he called, scanning the room until he spotted her by the fire. She rose and ran to him, flinging herself into his arms. "Preston, how did you know?" "Thomas came for me before going to the sheriff," he explained, holding her tightly. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though she couldn't stop trembling. "He had a knife, but I fought back like you taught me." Pride flashed across Preston's face, quickly replaced by rage. "If I find him, You'll turn him over to the law," Mrs. Finch interrupted firmly. "We don't need any vigilante justice the night before a wedding." Preston took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. "You're right, madam, but I'm not leaving Olivia alone tonight." Mrs. Finch nodded. "You can stay in the parlor. I'll bring down some blankets." Sheriff Baldwin arrived shortly afterward, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Probably just a drunk who got the wrong window," he suggested after hearing Olivia's account. "It was no mistake," Preston insisted. "It was the same man who attacked us before, the one who got away. He said it was revenge." Baldwin looked skeptical. Convenient that no one else saw him clearly. Thomas Finch stepped forward, his normally jovial face stern. "Are you calling my boarder a liar, Sheriff? Because I saw him too, just not clearly enough to identify." The sheriff backed down slightly. "I'll have my deputy patrol the area tonight, but without a clear identification." After Baldwin left, promising half-heartedly to investigate, Preston turned to Olivia. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," he suggested reluctantly. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let him take that from us. Besides, we'll be safer with the whole town gathered at the church." Preston studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm staying here tonight and I'll escort you to Mrs. Hollister's in the morning." True to his word, Preston spent the night on the parlor sofa, rising at dawn to stand guard as the household began stirring. After a hasty breakfast, he accompanied Olivia to Mrs. Hollister's home, where she would prepare for the wedding. "I'll see you at the church," he told her, kissing her briefly before reluctantly leaving her in Mrs. Hollister's capable hands. Despite the frightening events of the night before, Olivia found herself filled with calm determination as she dressed for her wedding. Mrs. Hollister and several other women from town helped her with her toilette, arranging her chestnut hair in an elegant style and securing a simple veil with a crown of autumn flowers. "You look absolutely beautiful, Mrs. Hollister declared when Olivia was finally ready, the ivory dress fitting perfectly. Olivia studied her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the poised, radiant woman who looked back at her. "Thank you for everything," she said, embracing her employer and friend. "None of that now, Mrs. Hollister said briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "You'll wrinkle your dress." A rented carriage took them to the church, where it seemed the entire town had gathered. Sheriff Baldwin had grudgingly posted deputies around the building, ensuring no unwelcome visitors could disrupt the ceremony. As Olivia stood at the back of the church, her arm linked with Elias Peterson's, who had offered to give her away in the absence of any family, she felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Having second thoughts, Peterson asked kindly, noticing her hesitation. Olivia shook her head. "Not about Preston. Never about him. I'm just stepping into a new life," Peterson finished for her. "It's natural to feel a bit overwhelmed, but that young man waiting at the altar loves you completely. I've seen how he looks at you like you're the sun rising after the longest night." Olivia smiled gratefully. "Thank you for doing this, Mr. Peterson." "It's my honor," he replied as the music began, signaling it was time to proceed. The church fell silent as Olivia walked down the aisle on Peterson's arm. She was aware of the faces turning to watch her, the smiles and nods of approval, but her eyes sought only one person. Preston stood at the altar, his gray eyes widening as he saw her. He was dressed in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression that caught at Olivia's heart, a look of such wonder and love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. When she reached him, Peterson placed her hand in Preston's and stepped back. Preston squeezed her fingers gently, and she saw in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart. Reverend Collins began the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The service proceeded smoothly, the familiar words taking on new meaning as Olivia and Preston exchanged their vows. When Preston slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, purchased with money he had saved from his delivery work, Olivia felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared finally. "You may kiss the bride." Preston's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, a pledge of the life they would build together. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Ryder for the first time, the church erupted in applause. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous. It seemed everyone in Mineral Park had contributed something: food, decorations, music. A local fiddler led a small band, playing lively tunes that soon had people dancing. Preston never left Olivia's side, his eyes constantly returning to her face as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Happy, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked softly during a quiet moment. Olivia smiled at her new name. "Completely, Mr. Ryder." The festivities continued into the evening with many toasts and well wishes from the townspeople who had come to care for both Preston and Olivia. Even Sheriff Baldwin made an appearance, grudgingly offering congratulations before helping himself to the wedding feast. As the celebration began to wind down, Preston leaned close to Olivia. "Ready to see our home?" she nodded eagerly. They had decided that rather than an elaborate wedding trip, they would begin their married life in the house Preston had built, saving their money for the future. They said their goodbyes amid cheers and good-natured teasing, then climbed into a wagon Preston had decorated with ribbons and flowers. He clicked the reins, and the horse began moving toward the edge of town where their new home awaited. The small house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, with mountains in the distance. Though modest in size, it had been built with care and attention to detail. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, large windows to catch the light, and a stone chimney that promised warmth in the coming winter. Preston helped Olivia down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," he said, carrying her across the threshold into their new life. The interior was simply but comfortably furnished with pieces Preston had either made himself or purchased with his earnings. A fire was already burning in the hearth, lit earlier by Mr. Finch to warm the house for their arrival. Preston set Olivia gently on her feet, watching her face as she explored their home. The main room served as both parlor and kitchen, with a solid table and chairs, a comfortable sofa, and shelves for books and mementos. A door led to the bedroom where a large bed covered with a colorful quilt, a wedding gift from Mrs. Finch, dominated the space. "It's perfect," Olivia declared, turning to Preston with shining eyes. "Everything is perfect," he crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Not quite everything. There's still something missing." "What's that?" she asked. "This," he replied, drawing her into his arms and kissing her properly, without the restraint he'd shown in public. Olivia responded eagerly, her arms winding around his neck as she gave herself fully to her husband's embrace. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Preston traced gentle patterns on Olivia's bare shoulder. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," he confessed softly. "After Sarah died, I believed that part of my life was over forever." Olivia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. And now, his smile was tender in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Now I believe in second chances, in new beginnings." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "In love that's strong enough to overcome the past." She leaned down to kiss him. "I love you, Preston Ryder." "And I love you, Olivia Ryder," he replied, "more than I have words to express." As she settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Olivia felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond forged in adversity and strengthened by love. The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. Preston's reputation as a reliable worker continued to grow, and he was eventually offered a partnership in the livery stable by Thomas Finch, who was considering retirement. Olivia continued working at the millinery, though now as Mrs. Hollister's partner rather than her assistant, designing hats that became popular not only in Mineral Park, but in neighboring towns as well. Their greatest concern remained the unresolved threat of the man who had attacked Olivia. Though there had been no sign of him since the night before their wedding, Preston remained vigilant, never completely at ease until the danger was dealt with. That resolution came unexpectedly, nearly a year after their wedding. Preston was working at the livery when Sheriff Baldwin arrived with news. "Found a body out by Rattlesnake Creek," he reported gruffly. "From the description, might be that fella who's been troubling you and your wife." Preston accompanied the sheriff to identify the remains. The man had apparently been killed in a dispute over cards in a mining camp, 20 miles away, meeting a violent end that matched how he had lived. When Preston brought the news home to Olivia, she felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the threat was finally gone. Sadness that a life had ended so wastefully. "Maybe now we can truly put the past behind us," she said as they sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Preston nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About expanding the livery, maybe breeding horses as well as boarding them." Olivia leaned against him. "That sounds wonderful." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about the future too." Something in her tone made Preston look down at her questioningly. She took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "Our future. It will be here in about 7 months." For a moment, Preston stared at her in disbelief. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might make the miracle disappear. "We're having a baby," Olivia nodded, her own eyes shining with happiness. "Dr. Morley confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Preston gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My Olivia." They sat together as darkness fell, talking of names and plans and dreams for their child. The night air grew cool, but they were warmed by the promise of the future unfolding before them. A future neither could have imagined that fateful evening when 3 men tried to drag her into an alley, and a passing cowboy ended it with one look. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new growth, transforming the landscape around Mineral Park. The small house on the rise was now bustling with preparations for the imminent arrival of the Ryder's first child. Preston had built a cradle with his own hands, its smooth lines and gentle curve revealing hours of careful craftsmanship. Olivia had sewn tiny garments and quilted a blanket, each stitch a testament to her love for the child she carried. As her time grew near, Olivia had reluctantly stepped back from her work at the millinery, though she still designed patterns that Mrs. Hollister's new assistant executed under her direction. Preston divided his time between the livery, which was thriving under his and Thomas Finch's management, and home, where he insisted on taking over the heavier household tasks. "You're fussing," Olivia told him one evening as he brought her tea and insisted she put her feet up on a footstool he'd positioned just so. "I'm taking care of my wife and child," he corrected her, dropping a kiss on her forehead. She caught his hand, her expression softening. "And doing a wonderful job of it. But I'm not made of glass, Preston. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife. Not my child," he replied simply. The baby arrived on a clear May morning, after a night of labor during which Preston wore a path in the porch boards, pacing anxiously while Mrs. Finch and the midwife attended Olivia. Just as dawn was breaking, a thin cry pierced the air, followed by Mrs. Finch's appearance at the door with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Ryder," she announced. "You have a son." Preston stared at her for a moment, then rushed past into the bedroom where Olivia lay, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly as Preston approached the bed with something like reverence. He sat carefully beside her, gazing in wonder at the tiny face peering from the blankets, a face with his dark hair. And when the baby briefly opened his eyes, Olivia's warm brown gaze. "He's perfect," Preston whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny fist that immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength. Olivia smiled. "I thought we might name him Thomas Henry Thomas for Mr. Finch, who's been like a father to me and Henry." "For Henry Blackwell," Preston finished, his eyes meeting hers in understanding. "I think that's a fine name." They called him Thomas, or more often Tommy, and he quickly became the center of their world. Preston discovered reservoirs of patience he had never known he possessed, walking the floor with his fussing son in the small hours, singing old trail songs in his deep voice until the baby settled. Olivia watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness beneath his strength, the tenderness that balanced his courage. By Tommy's first birthday, the Ryders had expanded their home, adding another bedroom and enlarging the main living area to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. Mineral Park itself was expanding too, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Preston's partnership in the livery had proven profitable, and they had begun breeding horses as he had planned. Olivia had officially become co-owner of the millinery, which now employed 3 assistants and filled orders from as far away as Prescott and Tucson. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of Tommy's growth. His first steps, taken from Olivia to Preston on a Sunday afternoon. His first words, "Papa," followed quickly by "Mama." His delight in the pony Preston brought home on his second birthday, a gentle creature that tolerated the toddler's enthusiastic pats with equine stoicism. When Tommy was 3, Olivia discovered she was expecting their second child. The pregnancy proceeded smoothly, and in the winter of 1887, Sarah Elizabeth Ryder joined their family, a delicate girl with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. Preston, who had worried that he might not feel the same overwhelming love for a second child, found his heart expanding effortlessly to encompass his daughter. Tommy, now old enough to understand that he was a big brother, appointed himself Sarah's protector, solemnly explaining to visitors that she's little, but she'll grow. The years passed in a tapestry of ordinary days and special moments. Another bedroom was added to the house. The livery expanded to include a blacksmith shop. The millinery moved to larger premises on Main Street. Tommy started school, showing an aptitude for numbers that suggested he might one day take over the business side of the livery. Sarah revealed an artistic talent that manifested in drawings of horses and hats, and the mountain landscape she could see from her bedroom window. Through it all, Preston and Olivia's love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable disagreements and challenges that come with building a life together. They were partners in the truest sense, each supporting the other's dreams while nurturing their shared vision for their family and future. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Olivia with a gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of Tommy and Sarah, painted by an artist who had passed through town. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, tears springing to her eyes as she opened it. "Oh, Preston, thank you." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on the chain. "I have another surprise," he told her, taking her hand and leading her to the porch where they often sat to watch the sunset. A new rocking chair waited there, its wood gleaming with polish, intricate carvings decorating the arms and back. "You made this," Olivia breathed, recognizing the careful craftsmanship that was her husband's hallmark. Preston nodded. "For when number 3 arrives," he said, his eyes twinkling. Olivia stared at him in astonishment. "How did you know?" "I only confirmed it with Dr. Morley yesterday," he laughed, gathering her into his arms. "You've been humming in the mornings, the way you did with Tommy and Sarah, and you've been turning green at the smell of coffee just like before." He kissed her tenderly. "I pay attention to my wife, Mrs. Ryder." Olivia leaned against him, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on a darkening street to a family, a home, a life built with love and determination. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "When we first met," Preston nodded, his arms tightening around her. "Often. I thank God I was passing by at that exact moment." "So do I," Olivia said, turning in his embrace to look up at him. Though I sometimes wonder if those men hadn't tried to drag me into that alley, would we ever have met? Would you have just ridden through town and on to somewhere else? Preston considered the question. I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway, he said finally. That some things are meant to be, regardless of the path that leads to them. He touched her cheek gently. But I'm grateful for the path we walked, difficult as parts of it were. Olivia rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally parted, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Me too," she whispered, "every step of the way." Inside the house, they could hear Tommy and Sarah laughing as Mrs. Finch, who was watching them for the evening, told one of her colorful stories. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of a piano playing in the saloon down in town. Olivia Ryder closed her eyes, savoring the moment. This was happiness, not the fleeting excitement she had once imagined love to be, but something deeper and more enduring. A shared life. A family created from choice and commitment. A love that had begun with a look and grown into something that would outlast them both, living on in their children and the life they had built together in this small corner of the Arizona territory. And it had all begun because 3 men tried to drag her into an alley, and a passing cowboy ended it with one look.